"Caw," Edvard called out. "Caw," Ester replied absent-mindedly as she checked her reflection on a shard of glass that hung inside her hollow. Edvard swooped down to the bottom of the old oak. A scrub jay trilled noisily, likely to shoo Edvard away. Crumb lived near Ester's tree and shadowed her all the time to her eating haunts. Crows are smart, but jays were tiresomely cunning. The scrub jay may be a cheeky bird, but Edvard was not so easily fazed. He hopped closer to Crumb. "Ca-Cawww," he sauntered. "What's up, my blue brother? Something catch your fancy?" Edvard did not like Crumb. Crumb did a sideways hop and tried to get out the way. "Nothing really. Are you waiting for Ester? Going someplace nice?" He winked greedily. "Ca-Cawww," Ester landed gracefully. "Only for a quick flight, and then attending the Parliament, Crumb. Edvard, let's go." Edvard threw a sharp glance at Crumb as though pinning him down with his stare. The two crows were off now, and as they did a long downward swoop to go higher, Ester took lead with Edvard behind her, leaving behind a suspicious and bored Crumb. Once up above, both of them started giggling. "He is so creepy and annoying," Edvard complained. Ester trilled. "He is only lazy and hungry, Edvard." "Just the same and still annoying," Edvard snorted. They landed on an old walnut tree by the eastern edge of Jellicly's farm. It was old but loaded with still green walnuts. "Ready? Caw?" Ester winked. "Caw! Here we go," Edvard replied. For the next hour or two, dear reader, the two crows had a great deal of fun picking and smashing walnuts on the rocks till they cracked. After having their fill of the delicious walnut meal they were able to scoop out, they picked a low branch to groom each other. First, it was Ester's turn. With her beak, she scratched and parted the feathers on Edvard's forehead gently. Edvard released a contented sigh as he bowed his head. "Ester?" "I have a question." Ester rolled her eyes. Edvard always had a lot of questions. "You know how the farmer was eating a watermelon when we were picking pebbles by the creek?" "Yeah?" "Why can't we have walnuts as big as watermelons with skin instead of a shell? We wouldn't need to do so much work around here for a tasty lunch." Ester stopped. "What? Why did you stop?" "I don't know. Ask Agatha at the Parliament today." Edvard grinned. "Did I stump you with my question?" "No, but we are late, and you know how the elder crows hate it when we delay the Parliament meetings." With that, Ester took off, and Edvard followed her with his head, looking up to the clouds. One day, Ester would surely realize how smart his questions really are. And sure enough, they were late for the day's Parliament, which was waiting impatiently for Edvard and Ester. Even though they were two of the younger crows, and there were more important matters for the adults to discuss before the session opened up for Young Crow Hour. The Parliament was very keen on decorum and attendance. Edvard shifted from one leg to another the whole time. Ester nudged him when his shifting started shaking the branch after a while. Finally, the moment arrived when it was time to ask questions. "Caw, caw, caw!" Edvard flapped his left wing excitedly. Agatha turned to him. "Hello, Edvard. How are you today?" Edvard blinked and hurriedly delivered his response. He was impatient, but they won't let him forget his manners. "I'm fine, Miss Agatha. I have a question." Miss Agatha didn't say a word. She kept her gaze straight and kept looking at him. "Oh, I am fine, Miss Agatha. Thank you for asking. How are you today?" Agatha kept her beak tightly closed. "Ah, yes. Manners." Edvard took a deep breath. "How are you today, Miss Agatha?" he asked politely. Agatha bobbed her head and did not show her smile. "I am doing well, young Edvard. Thank you for asking." She was going to take her own time. She smiled at him now. Edvard shifted his weight from one leg to another, awkwardly moving. His eyes searched for Ester. "What am I supposed to do now?" his inside voice seemed to be asking her. Ester looked away as though distracted by a faraway circling hawk. "Caw!" Agatha sounded satisfied. "You have a question?" Edvard was alert again. "Yes, Miss Agatha. Ester and I were picking walnuts today and we were wondering—" Ester coughed. Ca-Cawww. Edvard frowned and rolled his eyes. Miss Agatha, actually it was just me who was the one wondering why we can't have walnuts the size of watermelons. We only need to crack them open once for a full meal for all of us. A tittering rose from the back like a wave. Edvard felt warmth at the nape of his neck. Suddenly he felt very silly. They were all laughing at him. He was sure about that. That's a very good question, young Edvard. Agatha's gentle voice seemed to boom towards them, silencing the mocking titters. Let's all go to the watermelon field to check it out, shall we? Agatha took off, graceful and swift. With a flap and a flutter, one by one, all the crows took off and flew south to the field. Oh, what a sight it was, dear reader. They landed softly amongst the mess of watermelon vines, some still flowering and others bearing fruit. Ca-Cawww! Agatha signalled and turned 45 degrees. All the crows followed her motion. About 60 of them stood there, watching the farmer working from a safe distance. They seemed to wait there for a while that seemed like a long while. Some of them stayed still, others were pecking the earth. Still others had their eyes fixed on Agatha, and finally, Ca-Cawww, she called out, and took off again. All in unison with a flap and a flutter, the rest of them followed her. Soon they were perched on the same tree, ready to continue the Parliament session. Young Edvard, did you see? Does that answer your question? Edvard seemed confused. Was that little field trip supposed to be his answer? As usual, he was distracted and he wasn't really paying attention. Did she say something in the field that he had missed? He despairingly looked around to get a clue, but all he saw were the eyes of his clan looking at him and waiting for his answer. Edvard tried to hide his pout. I am sorry I ask questions, Edvard muttered under his beak. What exactly was he supposed to have seen that was his answer? Edvard! Agatha called his name gently. It was soft, but the old crow had steel in her tone. Forget I asked! Edvard was screaming inside his own young crow head in his young, angry crow voice when he felt a soft whoosh next to him. Ester. He turned to his best friend, who just seemed to know that he was embarrassed and distressed. They always do. Remember, dear reader, a best friend always knows. Yes, we saw, Miss Agatha. Ester piped in with effervescent cheer as she sidled next to Edvard. And? Agatha turned to Ester now. The entire Parliament was looking at them now. Ester cleared her throat. Well, we saw the watermelon was huge, and it seemed rather heavy. Right, Edvard? Ester poked him with her mind. Edvard caught on. Oh, yes, miss. Agatha. It was heavy. Some were round and others were a tad oblong. The farmer couldn't carry more than 2 with hands. At one point, we saw how the farmer had to place many in a wheelbarrow to move it to the truck. Didn't we, Edvard? Ester urged him to join her. Yes. Edvard had a short attention span. He must have surely been distracted when Ester and others had noticed all this. Ester continued to draw more attention to herself instead of Edvard's confused face. Sometimes when he is lost in his thoughts, his lower beak falls open and he'd forget to shut it close. Miss Agatha, the farmer loaded each watermelon from the wheelbarrow to the back of the truck. They were heavy but round. Like all round things, some of them rolled down when the truck moved. And? Edvard was all caught up now. And they crashed and smashed into many splotchy pieces. He yelled out so loud and punched his wingtip with triumph that some of the younger crows jolted up from the branches and almost caused some of their feathers to jump out. Edvard's face was all lit up now. Finally, he had remembered something. Just imagine, Agatha whispered softly. Just imagine if a walnut tree had fruit as heavy as a watermelon. And then it dawned upon Edvard. He was not a dim crow, just a distracted one. Ah, yes. Edvard blushed. He wanted to give Ester a hug for leading him to the right answer. I get it, Miss Agatha. Indeed, it is not nature's mystery, but its intelligence, that such a big tree has tiny shell-encased nuts that drop for us to feed, while a creeper that has tendrils to support its weak stems and lies so low has fruit that's too heavy for it to bear. And perhaps that is why its vines hug the ground. For if a tree as big as this had fruit, as big as the watermelons and skin that shatters easily, it would crush everything under it. Agatha smiled. The boy is lucky to have a best friend who has his back. He was still young, but was obviously very bright. "Good job, Edvard," she exclaimed. Ester, whose shoulder was hurting from being leaned against by a very happy Edvard, who had finally unearthed the answer to his own question. And as we leave behind the Parliament of Crows, gentle reader, let me ask you this. As you stroll by the creek that is flowing, or when you watch the sunset, or when you are huddled with a friend gazing at the endless night skies, do you have any questions that come to mind? It is all right. There is no such thing as a silly question. You see, Edvard's question was not silly. It only made him see nature's intelligent design. Perhaps you can't ask Miss Agatha, as the Parliament of Crows seldom invite non-crows to their sessions, but maybe you have an older human friend like Edvard has Esther, and you can ask them any question that befuddles you. So, what is your question?